Detective Heidi, welcome to Podcastina.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for doing the show. I have never had anyone in your line of work do the show, so this is a very exciting episode for me.
Oh, good.
Can you explain to the audience a little bit about your background?
Yeah. So I am a detective, retired detective from Phoenix Police Department, where I spent 25 years, if you can believe it, with Phoenix Police Department. 14 of those years I spent as a female undercover working sex trafficking on a daily basis. I've been solicited by thousands of sex buyers and recruited and groomed by traffickers out on the street, as well as online and on social media platforms. So I come in with some experience um, with that particular field. And then since retiring, I am still working in law enforcement for a different agency, actively working human trafficking investigations to this day. So,
I mean, that's just so remarkable. Since you're still in this line of work, can you tell me what are some of the biggest challenges that you're facing in this day and age?
yeah, so I think the biggest challenge right now, and especially with everyone on social media, is that everyone's calling everything human trafficking. For example, I was on TikTok just passing through, scrolling, and I saw this girl do a TikTok video kind of making fun of the fact that someone put a shopping cart next to her car door and she was trying to claim that she was being trafficked. And it was minimizing the severity of this problem. And I think that the main challenge is people obviously don't know what it is. And it is nothing to do with the shopping cart. She may have been being set up for a robbery or a sexual assault or something like that. Or someone was careless and just left their shopping cart on the side of the car. Who knows? But trafficking involves the commercial sexual exploitation of a person, and I wouldn't want to participate in any activity that minimized what victims go through.
Yeah, absolutely. And in something like that, it's probably Occam's razor that someone just left their shopping cart next to her car. And you're right, it's such a dangerous precedent to just all of a sudden cry wolf and be like, oh, this is sex trafficking.
Yeah, I don't know if it was for the views or the comments or what it was about, and I just want to clarify, that trafficking involves a sex act in exchange for some kind of commercial element, which would be in exchange for an item of value. It doesn't always have to be money. It could be buy my hotel room for tonight. It could be drugs. It isn't. Nothing to do with the shopping cart. And it is that exchange, that commercial sexual exploitation exchange.
Thank you for clarifying that. Without giving away any sensitive details, can you tell me about what some of the most profound, shocking cases that you worked on were?
Yeah. So I think maybe to start, I would start with how I even got interested in doing trafficking on a daily basis for that whole long time of my career. It started when I was a school resource officer, and I had been a cop already for 6, 7 years by then. And I happened to be going to the police station because we can't take the police car home, unfortunately, and you have to turn the keys in after your shift. And so I passed by this area of the police station called the juvenile holding area, and it has a little window in the door. And I happened to notice a little girl sitting in there that I recognized when she was in seventh or eighth grade at the school that I was an SRO at. And I kind of peeked my head in, and she recognized me as the cop at her school. But on this day, she was a little bit older. She was 16, almost 17. And, I asked her, well, why are you in trouble? And that's when she told me that she got arrested for prostitution. And I was, shocked that we were arresting kids for prostitution, first of all, but also that, this was happening to kids. And that's pretty much what started my interest in what can I do to um, stop this from happening to children. And I felt like I had a unique experience being a school resource officer around kids of this age all day long, every day for several years, that I would be maybe coming in with a little more understanding and rapport. And, it's one of those things where unfortunately I never saw her again. And I don't know the outcome of whether or not a trafficker was ever caught or whatever happened with her. And unfortunately, that was also at a time where the focus of enforcement was on arresting prostitutes all day long. In fact, when I first tested for a position with the unit, back then it was called the Vice Unit, now it's called the Human Trafficking Unit, we only had one female allowed position for each squad because you needed male undercover officers to pursue prostitutes. And now I'm happy to report that since we've recognized that you have to target the real bad guys, which are the sex traffickers and sex buyers, these squads outweigh women to men because you need female undercovers who really are the front lines in proactive undercover operations to target these particular suspects.
Wow, I can understand why that connection, having known her from your previous work, would have put you in there. Was there another case that stood out during your work?
Oh yeah, yeah. One that I actually teach on all the time. It was the biggest case of my career. It took 5 years to conclude from the point of when the juvenile, who was 16 at the time, on the day that she disclosed, and then she was in her 20s when the jury saw her in a trial that lasted 7 months. This case involves 7 victims, 2 juveniles, and I like to teach on it because I think people's perception of what a victim and even a suspect looks like is skewed. People think that victims of trafficking are, from the poor part of town or from, the bad area or kids in child welfare or people who have used drugs. And this one case is a perfect example. One of the adult females was a Department of Corrections officer working at the prison, lost her job, which is what her vulnerability was, and she entered the life of prostitution in her 40s when she met the trafficker at the strip club that she started working at, and then developed a drug
Wow.
problem and brought her 17-year-old daughter into that house, who was also being exploited. Same case, one of the other adult females, 19 years old, she was from, if you're familiar with Arizona, Scottsdale, which is like a richer area of Arizona. And she was up at the university doing, college. She was on Craigslist, and someone was talking to her about modeling pictures. And maybe that day her vulnerability could have been low self esteem. I don't know. But for whatever reason, this guy was able to convince her to not only come do the modeling pictures with him, but also have sex with him. And then he introduced
Mm.
her to this pimp who then exploited her out of his house for several years. And she's now got such a bad drug problem, and her entire life went a different direction. So right now she's a resident of our women's prison. So my point with all of that is that it's not just the poor kids or the socioeconomic demographic that people perceive would be someone in that vulnerability. It is the vulnerability of the person at the time, and it could happen to anyone.
That's such an important point to make. And I guess similarly to that, would you say it's more common to have these types of scenarios where there's a pimp and it's like a local issue, like he's local, the girls are local, versus what I think a lot of people have in their heads is, the Taken Liam Neeson thing of you go overseas and you get taken by someone who's like a visiting foreigner, or that could happen here. Tell me what's actually more common.
Yeah, I think there's two things to unpack in your question. One, there is, in my opinion, two different types of trafficking. You have more organized trafficking, which is Mexican cartels and brothels and massage parlors. And it's more organized, and it actually has a direct connection with out of the country. And then you have more individualized trafficking, which are individual pimps who are trafficking other individuals. Both of them work similarly, but there are some differences. But both are encompassed in the words sex trafficking and exploitation of victims and these kind of suspects. So I think it's really important to understand that what we're finding with individualized trafficking, because it's not so organized and such a big scale, they don't move around a lot. But the individuals have the frequency of being very transient and living out of hotels, and so they're not really local. They're moving from city to city, state to state, One, because they don't want to get caught by the police, but two, they want to keep their victims isolated so that they're completely dependent on them. So that if a person at the hotel engages in a conversation with them, and that normal person suggests, "Hey, can I help you get out of here and help you get away?" If I, the trafficker, see that going on, I'm going to pack up our stuff and we are leaving right now because I need my victim to stay with me. Otherwise, I lose my money. So it's very transient, and that does make it harder for law enforcement to actually hold anyone accountable and catch anybody.
That makes sense. And would you say it's more common to see underage people get trafficked or adult women?
It is the law of supply and demand. So we have the traffickers supplying the victims, and the demand, which are the sex buyers, formerly known as Johns, that are purchasing people for sex. And the demand is asking for the kids. And so traffickers are
Mm.
seeking out children to supply to the demand. And that is where that's coming from. I would say that there are people that have done studies. I couldn't tell you how many or what the percentage is of adults versus juveniles, but I think that there's an increased demand for juveniles because of the buyers.
That's devastating, but sadly not particularly
Mhm.
shocking to hear. Has there ever been a case that you've worked on that felt personal?
Yeah, I would say pretty much all the cases that I've worked on are pretty personal, only because I do take a lot of pride in getting these victims justice. And, you can't help but get emotionally attached to someone that's spilling their guts on everything that's happened to them over several of their worst times. And wanting to help them and getting emotionally invested in helping them so that they get justice. So it's one of those things that happens quite often, actually. Um, I can tell you that a lot of times when I teach on this, because I travel around teaching, that I do play case studies, and I get emotionally charged when I rehear particular parts of the case studies that I'm presenting on, because I'm trying to get an emotional response out of the audience, but it also affects me too. So it's just part of being human, I guess.
Understandably. What's the mental preparation like for you to deal with the heaviness of your work?
Well, it is somewhat, I wouldn't say I'm desensitized, but being in this lifestyle and having to work these kind of cases for so long, I do a really good job of putting my game face on and, um, doing business as usual. And, I think now that I've retired and I'm not as involved as I was in a lot of the undercover work, it's kind of creeping up on me, and I'm feeling, anxiety about all the things that I've, been through. And you take that moment to step back and pause, and then it all comes back, flushing in. So it's been interesting, especially this past year.
Of course, I've heard it referred to as empathy fatigue when you're just constantly hearing so many situations that, of course, would be a burden for anyone to carry. Do you have advice for people that feel like they have empathy fatigue when they're watching these terrible cases and it feels like it's one after the next? And if someone wants to get involved, but they're kind of coming up against that block of oh, I'm just simply out of emotional bandwidth, like what do you do to get past that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, doing the education in law enforcement and teaching has been really impactful for me as far as kind of meditative, because it helps me knowing that I'm going to pass along this information to another officer that will hopefully make the same kind of impact, especially even if they only do one case with a victim, and get a successful outcome and justice for this victim, that is enough for me to continue on and keep doing that. And that's been the therapy for me that I think I've needed. I think for someone, as far as advice for them, you know, sticking with it, recognizing what the actual goal and outcome is, which would be to help someone, and be there for someone else, even if it's a small thing where you're giving a ride. to court or sitting in the courtroom with them to support them. I think those are all extremely important, and that's invaluable to that person.
I love that. Thank you for that. When you were doing your undercover work, was there ever a situation where you felt like you were in danger and everything was happening at the 11th hour as far as backup? I mean, I don't know a lot about undercover work, so tell me what that was like.
Yeah, so many times when I'm out there on the streets, I change up what I look like because I would be like a blonde light bulb, looking the same. And because we worked this problem for so many years and for so long and in the same areas, because unfortunately, Arizona, and I'm sure where you're from, there are known areas for prostitution on the streets. And so, being visibly seen on a regular basis, but still successful as an undercover, you have to change up what you look like. And so, in doing that, I recall one time that I was standing there in the corner and I saw someone pass by and he rolled his window down. And then I recognized him and I started to go to the stairs to get upstairs to where our room was because I recognized it as a pimp that I had arrested, and
Mm,
he flipped a Yui and he was coming back towards my direction, and I didn't want to stick around to find out what he was. I didn't know if he recognized me because I had a different color hair wig on, and I wasn't going to stick around to find out. So I ran up the stairs and I told the room supervisor, and he ended up having patrol contact that pimp, and he did have a gun in the car. So I don't know what his intention was, and obviously that was done for me for the night, and that particular wig hair color for a little while. And yeah, it's definitely a dangerous situation because a lot of these traffickers, they don't they intimidate. They don't get intimidated. Um, I've had
right.
lots do threats from prison because I put a lot of them away for hundreds of years and they're not going to get out. So what else are they going to do all day long but mess with me? So it's getting to the point where a lot of that is part of that whole stress that I'm dealing with right now.
Understandably. For people that only know this line of work from watching Law and Order SVU, how does it differ?
Well, I think a lot of that is all the things that people expect from TV shows that are only an hour long. That, when we collect DNA, for example, it takes months to get results back. We can't just snap our fingers and walk downstairs and all of a sudden we've got a hit on this DNA. So it just doesn't work that way. So I think people's understanding of the ins and outs of law enforcement and how much it takes to investigate these kind of crimes, because these cases are not easy. They're really difficult because you don't have victims that even know that they're a victim. They are in love with their pimp. They believe all of the false promises that a pimp has promised them of this amazing life. They're going to get me a car. They're going to get me in beauty school. They're going to take me traveling. And they believe all of that. So they're very loyal to these traffickers. They're not really coming forward and saying, hey, Detective Chance, I'm right here. Please come talk to me. And so that's one element of it. And then the next element is the jury and the public who serves on a jury and their understanding of this problem. If I come in and testify, I'm probably going to talk about how this person was committing a crime of prostitution. And I'm going to ask this jury to see them as a victim. And then I might also testify that they were on the street with the phone in their hand, walking freely down the road, but they were not free to leave. They were trapped. And people's perception of what trapped is that someone has to be locked in a room somewhere or handcuffed to a bed, when in actuality, because of the coercion and the threats and all the other circumstances related to the grooming and exploitation of these people, they are trapped and they're not free to leave. So having a jury wrap their head around all of that is why public education and being on platforms like yours and having social media and things that I'm doing, as well as other law enforcement out there fighting this fight. We are trying to educate the public because that is who is going to sit on that jury and hold these people accountable.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so valuable. Speaking to things that people might not understand are going on today, what are some of the biggest, like, systemic and legal hurdles that you're coming into contact with as far as prosecuting?
Well, I can tell you we're better than we were before because when I do these presentations and I talk about that case with the 7 victims, I compare it first to a case that only had one victim, was a 14-year-old, and this trafficker convinced her to run away from a social media platform, and he trafficked her all over Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. And she had contact with law enforcement 3 times before she told us what was going on. And with all of that, we had a video of her getting assaulted in the hotel. We had the conversation from social media when he very first met her. We had the phone, we had GPS coordinates. He would rent hotel rooms in his name. We had all this evidence. And this is back in 2011. And unfortunately, back then, prosecutors weren't confident that these kind of cases, or experienced with them, that they would have jury appeal and that they would be something that they could win. And unfortunately, he was offered a plea of only 20 years for pimping a 14-year-old for over a year.
Wow.
And I compare that to the case that I didn't tell you the outcome of, but the seven victim case. He was found guilty on 101 out of 105 counts, and he was sentenced to 493.5 years. So 20 years to almost 500 years is where we've gone from. So I think we definitely are doing better with educating not only the public, but also prosecutors. I do a better job now than I did before, and then also judges.
It's good to know. So I would assume that having the trail now of everything being online is hopefully helpful not only in the prosecution leg but in the capturing leg.
Yeah, I mean, with people using social media, there's evidence of that. And even though people think that Snapchat goes away, it doesn't go away for law enforcement. We can still get access to things you delete. So, it is technology is used against us and also assists us, definitely.
What are some of the signs to look for if someone is out in the world and they suspect that they're coming across a victim of trafficking?
Excellent question. That is what I educate on is the indicators of trafficking. So I have this all in a resource on my website. At the end, I can give you that. But basically, there are multiple things, and then if these things are all occurring with the person you know, then this would rise to a suspicion of you need to call and report, and I can talk about that too. But signs of abuse. Anybody who comes around and shows up with visible sign of injury, we should be asking what happened to them. If you're really a friend, you should ask your friend what happened. Malnourishment, like I said, they're very transient, moving around. They're literally eating out of a little hotel fridge or fast food. They're not at a place where they're cooking healthy meals or have access to anything healthy. So they're malnourished. Multiple cell phones, even if the phones have a cracked screen, especially if it's a kid that shows up with a random phone that they found or their friend gave them. As a parent, I would say, well, we don't need that in our life and it goes in the garbage because I don't want them to have access to something that I don't have access to also. And it could be where they, go to Starbucks and get on the Wi-Fi and they can converse with their trafficker, or their trafficker can converse with them. Hotel cards, like multiple hotel key cards. Um, not to be judgy, but we've all lived long enough to know that nobody gives you anything for free without expecting something in return. So if someone's showering this person all of a sudden with some gifts, um, you know, where did this gift come from and what did you have to do to get it? Bragging about having a lot of money all of a sudden. There's people that all of a sudden fall off from social media or contacting their family and they just disappear. I mean, part of this whole situation is that traffickers are very skilled at burning bridges with your family and friends so that you're
Mhm.
completely isolated and dependent on them, so that even if we get in a fight and you try and leave or escape, you don't have anywhere to go because your friends aren't your friends anymore and your family thinks you're acting a fool and doing drugs and all the whatever lies this pimp has filled them with, or maybe you did get arrested and they think that you're a criminal. So All those things are intentional. Branding tattoos, if you've ever heard of those, um, just like on Yellowstone, if you're watching Yellowstone, the Duttons, they have the Y and they brand their cows.
Yeah,
Those
yeah. I've only seen it in the context of joining a cult, but that's interesting to know that traffickers use that as well. Say more.
Yeah, so the branding tattoos have two purposes. One, because it's this sense of belonging. We're a family. We all have the same tattoo. You guys belong to me. Everyone else out there are squares. If you've heard that term, you guys are law abiding citizens. You're squares. We're in the circle and the family. And then the second purpose is to advertise to other pimps, these people are mine. I own these people. And I've seen these tattoos as open out in the open, like on their neck, on their forehead, on their breast, and it's completely advertising ownership of another person. And that is one of the main indicators if you happen to see people with the same tattoos. That would be a clue.
Oh, wow, that's huge. And what are some of the red flags that so those are the ones that people should look out for if they suspect they know someone who's in a trafficking situation? What kinds of red flags are officers looking for when they're investigating?
Yeah. So when I teach to law enforcement, I talk about the fact that back in 1998, when I was in the police academy, I did not have a class on human trafficking. And we haven't even been training our own officers that long. We just started in 2014 in the Phoenix area. And when I travel around the country, I'm noticing that no one's raising their hand when I ask them if they had a class in the academy. So we're not training our own cops on what to look for. We're looking for gangsters and drug dealers, and the pimps know it. I've actually captured a
Mm.
live where a pimp was kind of doing like a FaceTime live, look at me. And there's 5 patrol cars in the background of this video. And he had just finished yelling at his prostitute and he threw money on the ground and he's bragging that these cops don't see him and he's not half wrong because we aren't training our officers to see them. So in talking to law enforcement, obviously there's a chance to recognize trafficking happening in every call that we respond to, whether it's a domestic violence, um, a loud noise complaint at a hotel, a hospital call of someone injured, even a traffic stop. So just recognizing, separating people, asking questions, seeing what's out in the open. I mean, you see the branding tattoos, then that would even jumpstart your suspicion. But also, you know, when there's someone's being overly cooperative, go ahead and search my car, officer. And they're not worried because they control the mouth of the occupants in the car and they're too scared to talk to the police. They're not going to get caught for anything. And it's where we need to do better at individually talking to people, separating people, and asking questions about where are you coming from, where are you heading to, what's your relationship with these people, how long have you known them, you know, what do you guys do for a living? Simple questions actually will lead to the answers that you suspect.
That's really good to know. I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the Epstein files and everything. And the question that I have about that is, how common do you think it is? Because I think when you say pimp, people kind of have an image in their head, right, of maybe someone from a lower socioeconomic area. Is it actually very common that you have someone as powerful and wealthy as Epstein running these type of circles? Is that like just as prevalent in trafficking as the lower end of it, if that question makes
Yeah.
sense?
I think that there's a lot we can take in from um, some of my experience. I feel like an individual pimp, what we described, individual trafficking other individuals, I feel like they often have a generational thing going on where, you know, like the car dealership guy wants to leave the car dealership to their kids. Most of the pimps I've had contact with, they were related to a pimp or a prostitute in their family, where
Wow.
their dad was a pimp, their mom was a pimp, or I'm sorry, a prostitute, and they just it was a learned behavior that they grew up with, and that's what they became. Um, in that, though, I've also had the other side of this where we have businesses and people of prominence, people who are CEOs and CFOs and upper management feel like they can go dial up an escort And because it's costing more, because they're not going to go get one where it might be the police, but are the police going to invest in undercover money of $2,000 for a date? I'm going to call up an escort, and it's the same thing. It's the same prostitution activity. It's the same trafficking situation. It's the same victim. So I think that we do need to focus more on this even more underground part of people of prominence that are doing this behavior um, more secretively than uh, out in the open, out on the streets, like individualized pimps. But it's definitely something that these high profile cases are bringing to our attention.
Yeah, I think it's so good that people are finally talking about it because it is still going on so much. What is the role today of social media in attracting victims?
Well, so as an undercover, I have 7 Facebooks, 5 Instagrams. These are outside my personal. Tagged Meet Me, Bumble, Plenty of Fish, Snapchat, TikTok. I opened up a Discord, all in undercover personas, so that I can have a trafficker recruit and groom me instead of a live victim. And I've been very successful with that. I've extradited traffickers all the way from Orlando, Florida to Arizona to see a judge on a felony, and they've never seen my face. So this whole thing that I've learned in catfishing pimps, and when I've done a warrant for our conversation, and I may have talked to this pimp for a week, is that the same message that was sent to me was copied and pasted to hundreds of other profiles every day that we were talking. And it's literally these traffickers are using social media and games and the platforms that allow for private messaging to cast a fishing line and to engage with anyone who will take the bait, and they literally are able to sit on their butt all day long and do just that and recruit and groom from their couch. And it's incredible to me that we don't have more parents involved in keeping our kids' profiles private. And I know that there's pushback probably from kids who have watched YouTube and thought, if I have X number of followers, I'm going to make money on Instagram or TikTok. And really, that's an open door into your house, into your child's bedroom, and you don't know who they're talking to. So, would you rather not have that happen, or have your kid with $100,000 followers on Instagram? I don't know what the answer is, but I think that parents really need to think through letting kids have access early on. This has to be early on because, you know, the influence comes from everywhere, and unless we're nipping that in the butt and establishing rules and expectations early on, it is going to be blown up. And I don't think we even know the ramifications of the internet and the ease of all of this, even to this day. I just see it getting worse.
Yeah, I can imagine that the consequences of that are so far reaching. In one of those cases where you can successfully arrest someone that's soliciting you online, are they able to then take whatever, like a search warrant of a computer turns up, and kind of follow up and find other victims that way? Is that like a realistic part of the detective
Oh,
work?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, we have limitations now. We can't just go through your entire phone. But that's why I said during the week long time period that I'm contacting this pimp, all of that is good to go. That's all mine. And I can look at all of those things and any other contacts you've made or tried to recruit and groom another juvenile. We can pursue whether or not that kid actually worked for you or was exploited by you and pursue you for more charges for sure.
Oh, good. That's good to know. So, more on kids being online, would you recommend overall? Because you see some people like even just blurring out pictures of their babies, even when it's on their profile and not necessarily like a child's profile. Is that how social media should be handled? Do you think it's just the safest bet to not put kids on there at all?
Yeah, and I think especially with AI coming around, parents who post their kids' first day of school, um, that child never probably realized that their face would be on the internet, and it could be used by AI. It could be used later. It also could be used by someone who's targeting the parent to find out where their kids are and who their kids are, so that they can target their kids. And that's all through us posting our children online.
Yeah, that makes sense. I see a lot of rhetoric on TikTok kind of putting certain social media accounts on blast for using their children, and it's like very apparent that that exploitation is happening. Whether obviously it's not the parents' intent, but it is obviously like a known consequence these days.
Yes.
So, we talked about the red flags that you see when you suspect someone is being victimized. What are the red flags that, as women or even as kids, like as we're moving about in society, what should we watch out for that might be traffic behavior that isn't like a shopping cart next to the side of a car? Because there's a lot of myths, I think. There's a lot of like these kind of urban legends of what is and isn't actually a trafficking trap. So, can you break some of that down for me?
Yeah, so just by definition, for us to prove the crime of trafficking is happening to someone, we have to prove three elements are going on, one of these three things: force, fraud, or coercion. The force is pretty self explanatory. That's some kind of violent incident involving visible sign of injury. That's easier to see. The fraud and the coercion are harder. The fraud is those false promises, this amazing life, all the things that I talked about as far as this pimp promising all of this amazing stuff that never actually really happens. And then the coercion are the threats, and the threats are really real to these victims. A lot of times I've had victims describe, he told me he was going to do this, and he did it. And so when I teach on it, I tell the audience, if I'm the pimp and I say I'm going to beat you up, I am going to beat you up because I need these victims that I have that I'm exploiting to know that what I say is going to happen. Otherwise, they wouldn't stick around. So they're very reliable in what they say and very convincing, and all of that's very real. And I think that the public needs to realize that that is all the dynamics going on here that could be happening to someone you know. And those things are all very active and very real, and they're going on constantly. It isn't like it ever lets up because there's always an opportunity for a victim to walk away. It really is. But the trafficker is always around the corner, nearby, sitting in the car, watching, managing, and has something over their head. I had one victim who literally had her children taken away from her from Department of Child Safety, and this trafficker who caused that problem promised to help her get those kids back, but you have to still do this for me. And so her entire situation was being trapped based off of trying to get her kids back and this false promise that he was going to help her with that. And it never ended up happening. So I think the other dynamic here is that the public thinks that it's happening in another country, that it's happening somewhere else. And I know that a lot of people probably watch Sound of Freedom, and that's a great movie. It's got everyone talking about what human trafficking is, but it's what it looks like in another country. That's not what it looks like domestically here in the United States. So I would suggest a couple of other movies like Sex Trafficking in America, which came out by Frontline. You know, the people who produced To Catch a Predator, Frontline.
Mhm.
They filmed our unit, and they filmed us for 3 years, and they followed us around.
Wow.
And originally it was supposed to be about the female detectives fighting for other female victims, but it turned into so much more than that when we had a case that they captured the beginning of and all the way through to the end, where this little girl met these guys on social media and were convinced to run away, and she was sold between three different pimps, and it ultimately ends with their accepting responsibility for what they did. And I think that that movie, as well as another one I would suggest, it's called Wake Up. It was on Delta flights. They actually had it on Delta when you were flying. You could probably see it on Wake Up, the official wakeup.com website or Instagram. But anyway, really good movie because it also shows the other side of this. It shows a buyer, and it's this guy who started off viewing pornography, and he would lock himself in the bedroom and view pornography. And at one point the little girl's knocking on the door, "Daddy, mom said dinner's ready," and he's zipping up his pants and going and having dinner with his wife and his child. But his pornography viewing escalated into wanting to act out in real life with someone, and that caused him to contact a prostitution advertisement, and then he ends up getting caught, and then he ends up attempting suicide and loses his marriage and everything else that could happen with that. And I think that that is a connection that isn't talked about enough. That pornography really at our fingertips with platforms like Patreon and OnlyFans is that is the next awful thing that a lot of people who are viewing that on a regular basis are going to start acting out on that. And that is a whole nother thing that we have to worry about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Legally, I mean, I guess the answer is probably both, but maybe you can expand on this. Do you see more kind of pursuit of the pimps and the traffickers, or more of the buyers, or who do they go after first?
Oh, we try and do both. Yeah, we absolutely would pursue any trafficker we could find and hold any buyer accountable. What an imbalance is going on, specifically to Arizona, it's a class one misdemeanor to solicit prostitution. You'll go to jail for 24 hours. We'll tow your car for 30 days. So you're going to have to tell your wife what happened to the car. And you can take a class, first offense, and make this all go away. It's a heavy fine, but that's it. Second offense, more jail time. Third offense, more jail time. Fourth offense, more jail time. But to put it in perspective, if I arrest a prostitute, her fourth conviction in a 5-year period is a felony, and she can go to prison and have a felony on her record. There is no equivalent to that for a buyer talking about
Mm,
adults, purchasing adults. So we definitely need to fix legislation and make it a stricter punishment for buyers 110%. I mean, that's the only way we're going to combat this problem. We wouldn't have this problem if we didn't have buyers buying people for sex.
that's true. As you mentioned earlier, it's a supply and demand issue. Is that like the worst? Is that kind of the bigger downfall right now in legislative issues?
Well, that, and then we do have some states that, well, and there's some areas that don't have legislation fine tuned where a trafficker can be told that a victim is 19 by the victim. And then if there's nothing else to say that she wasn't 19 or younger, then how could they possibly know? But in Arizona, it doesn't matter. It's your responsibility to know. And especially if you're going to, you know, traffic them and film them and make, produce harmful images of them and those kind of things, you need to know if they're an adult or not. Otherwise, you're in trouble. Otherwise, you're held accountable. So it's some states really need to look at that.
It should be that everywhere, because otherwise they could play the whole he said, she said game of, oh, anyone can just be like, well, she said she was of age.
Yes, and then for buyers too. I mean, here it is a class two felony to purchase a child, and we don't have to prove that you knew how old that child was. So it is where if you get pulled over by the police and we separate everybody and we find out that she's a 15-year-old, even though you thought she was 23, even though she looks like she could be 25, she's not. She's under 18, and you're going to get arrested for a class two felony.
That's good. That's definitely how it should be. As far as adult potential victims, what should we look out for? How common is it actually? The anecdotal story of, oh, I was walking around Target and somebody was following me and then they grabbed me out at my car, or they followed me home. Does that actually happen that often? Or is it more of what you were alluding to earlier, where, the trafficker will like know the victim, hold something over their head? Like, how often are people actually getting kidnapped into trafficking?
Yeah, I think that's one of the myths, and that's what's perpetuated by Taken and some of the other movies is that it's some form of abduction. And that does happen, but I would say 80% of how this happens is the other way, where it is a skilled manipulator, a pimp, that is investing time into discovering someone's vulnerabilities, developing a relationship with them, using the fraud and the coercion to get them to come with them and then exploit them. That is really how this is happening.
As far as the other 20% of the abductions, what does that look like?
Well, I mean, some of that is literally a kidnapping type of thing, where someone is out in the public. Um, for some of the organized trafficking that we're talking about with the brothels and the cartels, of course, that's going to be an actual, maybe even a home invasion, kidnapping situation. and then transporting that person to another country, withholding their ID from them, threats to their family, all of those things absolutely could be going on.
What kinds of safety tips would you give out to people who want to make sure that they stay safe, that their family members stay safe?
Yeah. So, well, that's mainly why I wrote my book. It's called Talk to Them, because I think that being informed is the first step. I think that knowing what it is, knowing the indicators, knowing how this happens, knowing what it looks like, that is the first step. And furthermore than that, I think that people need to realize that their perception of what a bad guy looks like needs to change. I think we talked about that tiny bit, but um, a buyer, I mean, I've arrested police officers, businessmen, day laborers, people in nice cars, people in shitty cars. I mean, it is just normal looking people. And the same with traffickers, normal looking people. And our perception of someone with bad intentions needs to change, because that is the first step in recognizing someone trying to sneak in and exploit us. So, paying attention to those things, paying attention to the indicators, and then ultimately how to report it and when to report is extremely important. If you've traveled any times recently, you've seen the National Human Trafficking Hotline and all the bathroom stalls and everywhere. The
Hmm.
National Human Trafficking Hotline was actually created for survivors to get out of the life and not necessarily involve law enforcement. So they're not mandatory reporters necessarily. So, um, it's best to call 911, especially if it's a crime happening in progress right in front of you, where the people are right there. You can get the license plate, describe them. We don't have to show up at your house or anything, but provide your contact information in case you may have seen something and we have additional questions for you. But reporting it is huge. Even if you think, I don't know if this is that serious for 911, 911, that's what it's for. It's for reporting. Now, some states have created their own hotline, like Arizona has our own human trafficking hotline. But the hotline, even though it's managed 24/7, it isn't for a thing happening right now. I would use the hotline for a time where you're at Starbucks and you oversee this lady on her laptop and she's on a prostitution website, what looks like nude pictures of women, and she's on the phone and it sounds like she's arranging dates and that kind of thing. And you don't want to, you got to get to work. You don't want to stick around for the police car for, because that could be 2 hours from now. So you want to report this just in case that is what you suspect is happening for real, but you want to let someone know. Then I would use that hotline for that kind of report. Get the license plate if you can get a picture or a video of this person, fully describe them, and again, leave your information so we can contact you. But that's what I would do.
That's excellent advice. Do those hotlines get used a lot since they started getting added to airports? Is there a big volume of people reporting,
Yeah,
self-reporting?
I think that the more people understand and learn about what sex trafficking really is, I think they want to help and they want to report. So yes, I don't know the number on how what the difference is from 5 years ago to now, but I definitely know that they're going to use because we get assigned cases through those.
Is there like a hand signal, or is there something that trafficking victims are using to try and catch attention in a discreet way when they're out in public? Because I've seen videos floating around and I just wanted to know if there's any legitimacy to that.
Yeah, and I think that it's a little hard to say if that's successful or not because I've met victims that have no idea that exists. So it's again an education of the public that that is a thing, and I wouldn't want to have the public not look for that or recognize that or associate that to maybe I should call and help this person. But I do have to say I haven't met very many victims that even know what that is. So I think that's just further education of the public, and then that way, if someone does learn that earlier on in life, and then they end up in a situation where they're trafficked, they'll use that.
Yeah, it's important that not only the victims, but people in and around them are understanding that too. And then, as far as God forbid you're in a trafficking situation and you're scared to report because you think you're going to get in trouble, what actually does happen with the victims? Are they shielded from prosecution, or what does that look like so that they're not afraid of getting out of the situation and getting themselves in trouble?
Yeah, I can tell you that we are repairing relationships, we as in law enforcement, because as I told you earlier, we were just arresting prostitutes all day long. And the pimps would tell them, you can't snitch on me. You're just going to go to jail too. You're committing a crime. Now we're trying to not do that. We're trying to actually ask the question we were never asking before, which is, what can I do to help you get out of this situation? And further than that, have a resource. So a lot of the law enforcement agencies I know of have victim advocates actually assigned to the unit that has, funding for a flight or a bus ticket or the backline phone number to a shelter, and can provide that information to this victim right in the moment of the rescue. But we have to repair relationships because we only really started not arresting prostitutes in the last few years. So,
Mm.
and there is still some that do get held accountable, because if they are offending on a juvenile, what are we going to do? There are some that are committing other kind of crimes. What are we going to do? You have some of this. There's a defense that you were being exploited, and that's the result of. But then some of this, I mean, if you just go out and kill somebody, well, we're still going to have to treat that like a homicide. You know what I mean? So it is a case by case thing, and it needs to be remaining as a case by case thing, because if we just blanket it's legalized, that's going to open up to a whole other ball of problems that we can learn from other countries that have done that and it hasn't been successful, and the problem has blown up and more people are exploited and children are exploited. I don't think that's the answer. I think what we're doing now and continuing on this path of educating the public and educating parents and educating potential sex buyers to not participate in this activity anymore is the path to actually solving this problem.
Is there anything that I missed that you want to make sure people take away from this?
Well, I just want to maybe express a call to action that if you do see something, to say something, because I have sat across the table from victims that have described being beaten up in broad daylight at a bus stop, and vehicles drove by and people kept walking by and no one called the police. So just, you know, be the one to call, even if it's not some big, huge thing. We investigate every call. So I would much rather be investigating something that wasn't really anything than not knowing about it at all and not having this victim get rescued years later. Uh, recalling that they had an opportunity but no one called. That's just the worst.
Well, thank you for that. Detective Heidi Chance, if people want to learn more about what you're doing, where should they go?
Yeah, so I am on Instagram. My Instagram is a_chance_for_awareness. So a chance for awareness, which is also my website, achanceforawareness.com, pun intended on my last name. And I have resources like that sex trafficking indicators list. I have like a decoding emojis, like when you're talking about chatting with child predators and things, they like to speak in code because just in case a parent sees what's going on the screen, they want it to be in code so that they can decipher quickly whether or not it's the child or a parent now trying to talk to them. But anyway, I also have other resources, how to talk to your kids and have a difficult conversation. I have some courses. I have recorded myself doing what I call my Power of Awareness course, which is my human trafficking awareness course. I've also been asked as a female and a police officer to speak multiple times for modern day situational awareness. And so I have an entire modern day situational awareness course. And then I do a class for parents on digital literacy and online safety. And then I did write a book, like I said, talk to them, and I just had it translated in Spanish because I feel that it's a vulnerability that if boyfriend comes and parents don't speak English and there's like a language barrier and boyfriend sees that as an opportunity to convince this child to run away, that's much easier for traffickers. I can see them targeting that demographic on purpose. So I think that having informed parents of all languages, and I'm going to work on other languages, but right now I just have English and Spanish, is super important to me because in my book I talk about an instance where, this one call I was on, everything had happened already, and this mom is, devastated and wants us to get this person, but at the same time, if she had just talked to her kid about all of the things on this social media platform she was on, none of this would have ever happened. And law enforcement's overwhelmed. There's no way that we could do anything without the support of the community and parents stepping up and doing some prevention also, because it does take all of us. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me.
Of course, and thank you everybody for listening. Bye.